In World War II, Japan did not lose the night because American soldiers became braver. They lost it because a system failed. On Okinawa, Japanese night attacks were not reckless. They were calculated, studied, and effective. They worked because Americans could not see. What ended those attacks was not firepower, not numbers, and not heroism. It was a quiet technological shift most people don't even know existed. If you stay with this story, you'll understand how a handful of infantrymen, using an experimental weapon almost no one trusted, forced the Japanese army to abandon one of its most effective tactics and changed how modern armies fight after dark. In the spring of 1945, Japanese night attacks on Okinawa were not acts of desperation. They were the product of experience. For years, Japanese commanders had studied one consistent weakness in American warfare. In daylight, American units were overwhelming. Artillery found targets quickly. Aircraft punished any force that stayed still. Naval guns erased entire positions. Fighting the United States head-on, under the sun, was a losing equation. So the Japanese shifted the fight to the one place where those advantages faded: night. Night infiltration was not chaos. It was discipline. Small units, often 10 to 30 men, moved without lights, without talking, without firing unless absolutely necessary. They advanced through ditches, tall grass, broken coral, and folds in the terrain that maps could not fully capture. Their goal was simple: reach the American perimeter unseen. Once inside, they didn't need superiority. A grenade tossed into a foxhole, a satchel charge against a machine gun nest, a rifle fired from a distance too close for reaction. This method had worked before. It worked at Guadalcanal. It worked at Saipan. It worked at Iwo Jima. By the time American forces landed on Okinawa, Japanese night tactics were refined, tested, and trusted. And during the first days of the campaign, they worked again. American units along the ridges and low ground quickly learned the pattern. During daylight, the battlefield felt manageable. At night, it felt hostile. Flares could light the darkness, but only briefly. And every flare carried a cost. When the light died, defenders were left blind, their eyes struggling to adjust, while the darkness returned all at once. Japanese infiltrators learned to move in those gaps, using the momentary blindness to close distance or change direction. Machine guns fired at sounds. Rifles fired at shadows. Thousands of rounds vanished into blackness. And still, the infiltrators came. By the end of the first nights on Okinawa, American casualties from infiltration were rising faster than expected. Not because the defenders lacked courage, not because they refused to fight, but because they were fighting an enemy they could not see. Japanese units understood this imbalance. Darkness was not just concealment, it was control. As long as night belonged to them, they could dictate when contact happened, where it happened, and how close it would be before Americans even knew they were under attack. That advantage shaped everything: morale, exhaustion, and survival. Men slept in fragments, if at all. Every sound in the darkness carried weight. Every night became a test of endurance. And nothing in standard American infantry doctrine offered a clean answer, at least nothing the soldiers on the line knew about. Because while Japanese units were relying on doctrine refined over years of combat, something else had arrived on Okinawa quietly, almost unnoticed. It wasn't a new division. It wasn't a change in leadership. And it wasn't a tactic designed to meet night infiltration head-on. It was a system, an experimental one, heavy, awkward, and dismissed by many who saw it. Most of the men carrying it didn't know if it would work outside of training. They didn't know if it could survive heat, humidity, and sustained combat. And they certainly didn't know it would force the Japanese army to reconsider one of its most reliable methods of fighting. At this point in the story, nothing has changed yet. The Japanese still own the night. The Americans are still reacting. And the ridgelines of Okinawa are about to prove whether a quiet technological shift can do what courage and firepower alone could not. The moment the balance breaks comes next. April Unust. Omianoa sute patruzech shichinch. 23:47 hours. Private First Class Robert Chun is crouched inside a shallow foxhole on the southern edge of Kakuzu Ridge. The darkness around him is absolute. No horizon, no silhouette, just sound and expectation. Across his knees rests a weapon unlike anything carried by the men beside him. A thick scope, oversized and fragile, is bolted to the receiver. A cable snakes from the housing down his back into a heavy battery pack strapped against his spine. The full system weighs nearly 6 times more than a standard carbine. 13 pounds of battery, nearly 30 pounds total. The platoon has a name for it. A joke, mostly. A car battery with a trigger. 8 now. 80s. Some say it will never work in combat. Some say the humidity will kill it in minutes. Some say it's a distraction dead weight when grenades start landing. Chun doesn't argue. He hasn't fired the system once outside training. He doesn't know if the battery will hold charge. He doesn't know if the scope will fog. And he doesn't know if he'll survive long enough to find out. What he does know is this. Japanese infiltrators have already killed dozens of Americans on this ridge in the past 3 nights. And every night follows the same pattern. Silence. Movement. Sudden violence at close range. At 23:51, Chun hears something southeast of his position. 60 yards out, maybe more. Fabric brushing vegetation. A boot scraping coral. He sees nothing. The moon is a thin crescent, mostly hidden by cloud cover. Naked eyes are useless. Chun reaches back and flips the switch on the battery pack. A faint hum vibrates against his back. Inside the system, voltage surges to life. Chun raises the carbine and presses his eye to the scope. The field of view is narrow, constricting. He scans slowly, deliberately, left to right. Green-gray noise fills the image. Leaves, rock, static shapes that mean nothing. Then, something separates itself from the background. A shape, a man, crawling, roughly 65 yards away. Bright green against darker terrain. Chun can see the outline of a torso, arms pulling forward, the shape of a rifle slung across a back. This is not theory. This is not training. This is an enemy who believes he is invisible. Chun keeps watching. The man pauses, listens, then moves again using a shallow drainage cut as cover. 2 more shapes emerge behind him. 3 infiltrators, single file, closing toward the American line. Chun shifts his grip. The weapon is front-heavy. He braces the stock, slows his breathing, and switches the selector to semi-automatic. He was trained for this range. Beyond 50 yards, precision matters more than volume. He centers the reticle on the lead figure and fires. The report is sharp but muted by vegetation. The flash is minimal. The first infiltrator jerks and collapses. The second freezes. Chun fires again. The second drops. The third begins to rise, instinctively trying to retreat. Chun fires a third time. The body falls backward into the ditch. The engagement lasts less than 10 seconds. Chun doesn't celebrate. He keeps scanning, searching for movement, waiting for return, fire that never comes. The bodies remain still. The darkness stays silent. This is the moment the system proves something critical. Not that it kills, but that it kills without being understood. Because somewhere beyond Chun's field of view, Japanese soldiers are about to realize something is wrong with the night and they don't yet know why. Voices drift through the darkness south of Chun's position. Low, urgent, Japanese. They come from the tree line roughly 80 yards out beyond where the first 3 men fell. Chun brings the scope back up. 4 figures appear, crouched behind a fallen tree. They aren't advancing. They aren't firing. They're pointing toward the drainage cut where their comrades died. One gestures sharply. Another shakes his head. They are trying to understand what just happened. There was no sustained fire, no visible muzzle flash, no tracers cutting through the dark. Just 3 men who went forward and never came back. The 4 infiltrators don't push the attack. Instead, they move laterally, sliding west along the tree line, staying low, using vegetation as cover. This isn't retreat, it's repositioning. They're searching for a route that hasn't been compromised. Chun tracks them through the narrow field of view. The distance is close to the limit of what he's been trained to engage at. He doesn't fire. Battery discipline matters. Overheating matters. Picking the right moment matters more. The shapes fade into thicker brush. Chun shuts the system down. The hum dies. The scope goes dark. He checks the time. He's been running the system for over 20 minutes. The instructors were clear. Continuous use shortens battery life and increases heat. The system works, but only if it's managed. He waits in total darkness again. 5 minutes pass. Then sound returns closer this time. West. Roughly 55 yards. Chun powers up. Two shapes bloom into view. Low to the ground, pushing through tall grass. The same group has split into pairs. A flanking move, a textbook response to an unseen threat. This time, Chun doesn't wait. He fires once. The lead man collapses. The second rolls hard to the side, trying to find cover that doesn't exist in the green world of the scope. Chun tracks the movement and fires again. The second shape goes still. 2 more bodies. No return fire. Chun powers down immediately. The battery indicator is dropping faster now, 40% remaining. Not enough for another prolonged engagement. He reaches back and pulls a fresh battery pack from his kit. The swap is practiced but tense. Disconnect, reconnect, secure, all by feel. Eyes fixed on the blackness ahead. 15 seconds. At 0, 34 hours. The system is live again. What Chun doesn't know yet, but will soon learn, is that the Japanese are already adjusting. They stop using the obvious routes. They abandon drainage cuts and clean tree lines. They begin pushing through the worst terrain available: dense vegetation, broken coral, ground that forces slow movement and complicates observation. The narrow field of view of the M3 becomes a liability. It can see, but only where it's pointed. Miss the angle, and the enemy can still slip through. Chun adapts as well. On the following night, April 2nd, he changes position. Instead of sitting directly on the forward edge of the perimeter, he moves to a small rise behind it, an elevated point with overlapping sightlines. From there, he can watch approach routes rather than react to them. At 1:43 hours, movement appears again. A single infiltrator, cautious and experienced. He moves in short bursts, stopping often, listening, testing the darkness. A narrow clearing opens ahead, barely 12 feet wide. The man pauses at its edge, then commits, sprinting across to minimize exposure. Chun leads the movement and fires. The infiltrator drops mid-stride. As Chun scans for more targets, 3 additional shapes appear farther back, near the tree line. They stop. One signals. The group changes direction and disappears into the brush. That moment matters, because it's no longer just about kills. The enemy is beginning to map invisible danger zones. Routes that used to be safe are quietly abandoned. Approaches that worked nights ago are now avoided. For the first time on Okinawa, Japanese night attacks are no longer confident. They are cautious. And caution, in the dark, changes everything. By the early hours of April 2nd, Chun has learned one hard truth. The system works, but it does not forgive mistakes. At 3:12 hours, Chun has been scanning continuously for nearly 20 minutes. The ridge is quiet, too quiet. No gunfire, no shouting, just the slow pull of exhaustion pressing against his focus. Then the image flickers. Green static, darkness, static again. Chun freezes. He pulls the scope slightly away from his eye, then brings it back. The image returns for a second, then collapses again into noise. The infrared spotlight housing is warm to the touch. Too warm. The system is overheating. This is the failure the instructors warned about but could never fully recreate in training. Tropical humidity. Sustained operation. Heat trapped inside a sealed unit never designed for nights like this. Condensation forms where optics should be clear. Chun shuts the system down immediately. The hum dies. The scope goes black. He waits, counting seconds in his head. 100, 120. He can't risk more. Every second blind is another second the perimeter could be breached. He powers the system back on. The image stabilizes. Chun exhales and adjusts his routine. No more long scans. Short bursts only. 10 seconds on, 30 seconds off. Enough to sample the darkness without cooking the hardware strapped to his back. This is not marksmanship anymore. This is system management. The battery pack is another problem. While it provides the power to see in the dark, it also generates heat, significant heat. Combined with the ambient temperature and humidity, it turns the operator into part of the cooling system. If Chun pushes too hard, the scope blinds him. If he's careless, the battery drains too fast. If he hesitates too long, infiltrators slip closer. There is no margin. At 4-1 hours, movement returns. This time it's heavier. 7 shapes appear southwest, roughly 70 yards out. They move differently than before, more deliberate, more aggressive. A loose column that quickly spreads into a line. This is not probing. This is an attempt to force contact. Chun watches them advance. 70 yards, then 65, then 60. He feels the pressure build. Engage now and risk revealing his position, or wait and let them get closer, where even a perfect system might not be enough. He fires. The center man drops. The others scatter instinctively, diving for cover and firing blindly toward the American line. Muzzle flashes crack the darkness in brief yellow bursts. But they're firing at the wrong place. Chun is not where they think the Americans are. He's elevated, offset. Watching from behind the main line, the muzzle flashes become markers. Chun waits for a flash, tracks the shape behind it, fires. One body collapses. Another flash. Another shot. He repeats the cycle. Wait, identify, fire. 4 more men fall in under half a minute. The firing stops. Silence returns. 7 infiltrators lie motionless in front of his sector. No American casualties. No alarms triggered. No panic spreading down the line. Chun powers down again, hands steady but jaw tight. This engagement proves something just as important as the first kills. The system doesn't just see in the dark, it punishes predictability. Japanese units are learning, but every adjustment they make still assumes one thing, that darkness hides them. And as long as they believe that, they keep exposing themselves in ways they don't yet understand. By dawn, word spreads quietly along the ridge. The car battery rifle isn't a joke anymore, but it's also not magic. It demands discipline, timing, restraint. And in the hands of someone who learns those rules fast enough, it turns the night into a trap. By the morning of April 3rd, something subtle but unmistakable has changed along the American lines. There is no announcement, no formal briefing, no declaration that the night has been won. But the tone is different. Men who survived the last 2 nights notice it first. Fewer sudden explosions inside the wire. Fewer shouts in the darkness. Fewer medics moving forward before dawn. The Japanese are still there, but they are not coming the same way. Across the 96th Infantry Division, other operators using the same experimental system begin reporting similar patterns. Not identical engagements, but the same result. In one sector, near Tombstone Ridge, another infantryman detects movement well beyond the range where infiltrators expect to be seen. He doesn't fire immediately. Instead, he radios coordinates. Machine gun fire is adjusted before the Japanese reach the perimeter. In another position, an operator identifies a group of infiltrators, pausing to reassess an approach route. The group withdraws without firing a shot. No casualties on either side, but an attack that never happens. That matters, because every infiltration that doesn't reach the line is a grenade that isn't thrown, a foxhole that isn't breached, a man who doesn't wake up screaming in the dark. By the end of the night, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Sectors covered by M3 operators experience fewer close contacts, fewer alarms, fewer emergency reactions. The difference is not dramatic in any single moment, but over hours, it compounds. Japanese units are still attempting night movement, but they're slower now, more cautious. Groups hesitate, routes change. Attacks that would have been launched 2 nights earlier are quietly abandoned. This isn't fear. It's uncertainty, and uncertainty is poison for a tactic built on confidence and timing. Chun sees it in real time. At 2:20 hours, movement appears at the edge of his observation range, then stops. A shape lingers, crouched, unmoving. Minutes pass. The figure retreats without advancing another yard. Later, another group approaches, then splits wide, probing for a gap that doesn't exist anymore. Chun tracks them, but doesn't fire. He doesn't need to. The night itself is doing the work. By dawn, officers begin comparing notes. Not formally yet, but enough to see the outline of a trend. The M3 operators make up only a small fraction of the division's infantry strength. But wherever they are positioned, something breaks. Japanese infiltration attempts drop sharply in those sectors. Not gradually, abruptly. Men sleep longer between alerts. Exhaustion eases slightly. Defensive lines hold with fewer frantic reactions. This is the moment the system proves its real value, not the kills, the prevention. The enemy is no longer choosing when contact happens. The Americans are no longer reacting blindly. The balance of initiative, the most fragile element of night combat, has shifted. And the Japanese notice. Captured documents later reveal early instructions filtering down the chain of command. Avoid open approaches. Move slower. Assume observation even in total darkness. Test routes carefully before committing. These are not the orders of an army confident in its advantage. They are the first signs of retreat. What the Japanese still don't understand is why this is happening. They know men are dying without warning. They know attacks are being detected earlier than expected, but they don't know how the Americans are seeing them. There is no visible light, no new weapon sound, no obvious change on the battlefield. Only the growing realization that darkness has become unreliable. And once darkness stops working the way it used to, an entire method of fighting begins to collapse one cautious movement at a time. April 5th, 1945. Just after midnight, the air along Kakuzu Ridge begins to change. The temperature drops slightly. The breeze shifts. Moisture rolls inland from the coast, slow and silent. By 2 hours, fog settles over the battlefield. Visibility with the naked eye collapses to almost nothing. 20 feet, maybe less. Shapes dissolve into gray walls. Sounds lose direction. Distance becomes guesswork. For the first time in days, the darkness feels familiar again. Chun activates the system. The scope cuts through the fog better than visible light, but not cleanly. The image degrades faster. Edges blur. Effective range is cut nearly in half. Where he once saw clearly at 70 yards, now the picture breaks down beyond 35 or 40. This matters. Fog doesn't just hide movement. It compresses time. At reduced range, infiltrators don't need patience. They don't need perfect routes. They only need to close distance fast enough that detection comes too late. At 2:41 hours, movement appears at the edge of Chun's limited view. Multiple shapes, at least 10, possibly more. They are advancing in a loose skirmish line, spread wide, using the fog as a shield. This is not a probe. This is an attempt to overwhelm the system's weakness. Chun fires at the nearest figure. The shape stumbles and collapses. The rest keep moving. He fires again. Another drops. Still they advance. 30 yards. 25. Too close. Chun switches the carbine to full automatic. The weapon bucks as he fires a sustained burst into the line. 15 rounds vanish in less than 2 seconds. He reloads and fires again, forcing the advance to break. The infiltrators scatter, some retreating into the fog, others dropping prone, disappearing into the gray. The fight is over almost as quickly as it began, but the cost is real. Chun checks his battery. The sustained firing and extended use have drained it fast. His second pack is nearly depleted. He has stopped the push, but barely. When the fog lifts near 3:47 hours, the ground in front of his position tells the story. 7 bodies lie where the skirmish line advanced. 3 more are found closer to the perimeter than any previous group in his sector. This is the closest the Japanese have come to breaking through since the system arrived. And they know it. The fog tactic almost worked. For the first time, the Americans see what happens when the system's edge narrows, when visibility shrinks, when detection comes late. The advantage isn't erased, but it's fragile. That realization spreads quickly. M3 operators adjust. Engagement ranges are shortened. Fire discipline tightens. Positions are shifted to compensate for reduced visibility. Operators coordinate coverage more closely, overlapping sectors so no single blind spot becomes fatal. And the Japanese try again. But fog is not a switch. It doesn't obey schedules. And when it thins, the same problem returns. They can't see what's watching them. Within hours, the advance patterns slow again. Groups hesitate. Movements fragment. The confidence gained from the fog fades as quickly as it arrived. The lesson on both sides is clear. The system is not invincible, but neither is darkness. The fog has proven something important, not that the night can be reclaimed, but that the margin is narrowing. And for the Japanese, a tactic that depends on perfect conditions is already dying. The night no longer belongs to them. It merely tolerates them. April 7th, 1945, 1:56 hours. Chun is scanning his sector in short, disciplined bursts. 10 seconds on, 30 seconds off. The fog has thinned, but the night remains heavy, sound travels poorly, and distance is deceptive. Then the darkness breaks. A sudden white beam flares 60 yards in front of his position. Not a muzzle flash, not a flare. A flashlight. The light is intense, focused, and deliberate. It sweeps across the ground, searching. The beam snaps directly toward Chun's position. Inside the scope, the image explodes into white. The image converter tube is overwhelmed. The green world collapses into glare. For the first time since the system arrived on Okinawa, Chun cannot see through it at all. This is different. The Japanese have finally understood something important. They may not know how the Americans are seeing in the dark, but they know it involves optics, and optics can be blinded. Chun shuts the system down instantly and looks with naked eyes. He sees the flashlight beam cutting arcs through the darkness, probing, confident, moving back and forth as if daring the unseen enemy to answer. The tactic is clever. It forces the M3 operator to choose. Remain blind behind powered optics, or give up the advantage and fight like everyone else. But the tactic carries a fatal flaw. A flashlight does not just blind. It reveals. The beam marks its owner with absolute clarity. Chun doesn't hesitate. He reaches for a fragmentation grenade, pulls the pin by feel, and throws toward the source of the light. The grenade detonates 12 feet from the flashlight position. The beam dies instantly. Chun waits, counting in his head. 10 seconds. Long enough for the image tube to recover. He powers the system back on. The green world returns. A body lies near where the light had been. 2 more shapes are retreating east. Low and fast, trying to escape the sudden realization that their countermeasure has failed. Chun tracks one of them through the scope and fires. The shape drops. The second disappears into thick vegetation. The flashlight tactic worked briefly. It forced the system offline. It disrupted the operator's advantage, but it also turned an invisible infiltrator into a fixed target. And now the Japanese know something else. Their enemy can adapt. Over the next hours, flashlight use appears sporadically along the line. Each time, the result is similar. The lights blind the scope, but only momentarily. Grenades, machine guns, and rifle fire quickly converge on the source. The countermeasure exposes positions faster than it neutralizes the threat. By dawn, the flashlight tactic fades. This exchange marks a critical turning point. The Japanese have reached the edge of what adaptation can offer. They have tried terrain. They have tried weather. Now, they have tried direct technological interference. Each attempt reveals the same truth. They are reacting to something they cannot see and cannot fully understand. For the Americans, the lesson is equally clear. The system has vulnerabilities. It can be blinded. It can be overwhelmed. But every vulnerability requires the enemy to announce themselves to exploit it. And that is a losing trade. By this point, The night fighting has changed character entirely. Infiltration is no longer an aggressive method of attack. It is a cautious experiment, one that risks sudden, invisible death with every step forward. Orders begin to shift. Attacks are delayed. Routes are avoided. Units wait for conditions that may never come. The night still exists, but it no longer belongs to the side that once controlled it. By April 8th, the change is no longer subtle. It shows up first in reports dry, impersonal documents compiled before sunrise, after-action summaries, casualty tallies, notes from company and battalion staff trying to make sense of the last 7 nights. Across the 96th Infantry Division, the numbers begin to separate themselves from expectation. During the period from April 1st through April 7th, Japanese casualties caused by rifle and carbine fire during night operations spiked sharply. The increase is not evenly distributed. It clusters around specific sectors, positions covered by a small group of operators using the same experimental system. Those operators represent only a fraction of the division's infantry strength, roughly 3%. Yet their contribution is disproportionate. When the tallies are compared, the result is unmistakable. Nearly a third of confirmed Japanese nighttime small arms casualties can be traced back to those positions. More striking still is the absence of American losses in the same areas. Sectors with M3 coverage experience dramatically fewer successful infiltrations. Grenades thrown inside the wire drop to near zero. Close-range firefights all but disappear. Medical logs show fewer nighttime trauma admissions from those sectors than from areas without coverage. The system is not just killing, it is denying contact. That distinction matters to command. In night combat, preventing contact is more valuable than winning it. Every infiltration that fails before reaching the line saves ammunition, manpower, and morale. Every attack that never materializes preserves combat effectiveness for the next day. By the 8th day, the division's after-action reporting uses language that hasn't appeared earlier in the campaign. Significant reduction. Exceeds. Marked decrease. All. Immediate tactical impact. I do. The pattern is clear enough that staff officers begin adjusting deployment. Operators are repositioned to cover approach routes rather than static points. Overlapping sectors are emphasized. Coordination between observers and machine gun teams increases. This is no longer an experiment. It is a capability. The Japanese notice the shift as well. Captured documents recovered later in the campaign reveal changes filtering down the chain of command around this time. Instructions caution against routine night movement. Infiltration units are told to move slower, to assume observation even in total darkness, and to avoid predictable approaches. Most importantly, commanders begin limiting night operations to specific circumstances, poor weather, heavy fog, or final defensive actions where movement is minimal. This is not adaptation, it is withdrawal. The Japanese army is not conceding Okinawa, but it is conceding something else. Its confidence that night provides freedom of action. That concession reshapes the battlefield. As night infiltration declines, Japanese units retreat deeper into caves and underground positions. Engagements shift toward daylight hours, where concealment is built from rock and earth rather than darkness. The tempo of surprise attacks slows. The initiative once held at night slips away. For the American infantry, the effect is immediate and physical. Men sleep longer between alerts. Defensive lines stabilize. Exhaustion eases just enough to matter. None of this is dramatic. There is no single order declaring victory over the night. No public announcement, no ceremony. The change happens quietly, through fewer attacks, fewer casualties, and a growing absence where violence used to be. The system has done what doctrine could not. It has removed the enemy's confidence. By forcing the Japanese to assume observation in total darkness, it has turned every movement into a risk calculation, and every risk into a reason not to move at all. This is the moment the night stops being a weapon, not because it disappears, but because it can no longer be trusted. By April 12th, the conclusion the Japanese command has been avoiding can no longer be delayed. Night infiltration, once a reliable method of pressure and attrition, has become unpredictable. Not dangerous in the usual way. Dangerous in a way that cannot be mapped, timed, or rehearsed. Reports from the front repeat the same phrases. Men are being detected earlier than expected. Approach routes are compromised without warning. Units are taking losses without understanding why. Most troubling of all, there is no consistent countermeasure. Weather helps sometimes, terrain helps briefly, direct interference helps at a cost. None of it restores confidence. An intelligence directive circulates through Japanese command channels during the second week of April. It is cautious in tone, precise in wording, and unmistakable in meaning. Large-scale night surface operations are to be limited. Infiltration attacks are to be conducted only under conditions of severely reduced visibility. Units are to prioritize defensive positions where observation is impossible. Caves, tunnels, underground complexes. This is not a tactical adjustment. It is a doctrinal retreat. The Japanese army is not abandoning Okinawa, but it is abandoning the assumption that darkness grants freedom of movement. The night, once treated as an ally, has become a liability. On the ground, the effect is immediate. Patrols thin out. Approach routes go quiet. The sharp rhythm of night alerts softens into long stretches of uneventful darkness. When contact does occur, it is tentative. Small probes, hesitant movement, units withdrawing at the first sign of detection. For the American infantry, the change is unmistakable. Foxholes that once braced for sudden explosions remain intact through the night. Machine guns stay silent. Medics are not called forward before dawn. The absence of violence becomes the signal. This is what success looks like when a tactic dies. Not victory banners, not captured ground, but attacks that never happen. The M3 operators continue to work the same way. Short scans, battery discipline, careful positioning. There is no celebration, no sense that the danger has passed completely. The system still overheats. Batteries still drain. Fog can still compress distance. But the pressure has changed sides. Now it is the Japanese who must assume they are being watched, and that assumption alters every decision. Movement slows, timing stretches, aggression fades into caution. Night becomes something to endure rather than exploit. Within days, the shift is reflected in broader operational patterns. Japanese forces consolidate deeper underground. Engagements move toward daylight hours, where concealment is structural rather than environmental. The tempo of surprise attacks drops sharply. The doctrine that once defined Japanese night fighting is no longer applied in practice. Not because it was disproven in theory, but because it failed in reality. For Chun and the other operators, the work continues with less frequency. The system is used when movement is suspected, when conditions align, when command requests coverage. But the constant pressure of nightly infiltration is gone. The night still falls over Okinawa, but it falls differently now, quietly, uneasily. And for the first time in the campaign, darkness no longer belongs to the side that once mastered it. By the end of April 1945, the fighting on Okinawa continues. The island is far from secured. Casualties still mount, caves still have to be cleared. Positions still change hands under artillery fire, but one part of the battlefield has changed permanently. The night no longer drives the tempo. For the 96th Infantry Division, this shift becomes visible in formal evaluations compiled as the campaign grinds on. After-action reports don't describe a miracle. They don't credit bravery or improvisation. They describe a capability. Night infiltration casualties decline sharply in sectors with coverage. Defensive lines hold with fewer emergency reactions. Units are able to rotate men more effectively because they are no longer fighting blindly every night. The reports are careful with language. They don't claim the system is flawless. They note overheating. They note battery limitations. They note reduced range in fog and heavy rain. But the conclusion is consistent. The M3 system works as intended. It gives American infantry the ability to observe and engage the enemy in conditions where the enemy expects invisibility. And that ability forces changes on the opposing side that no amount of conventional firepower could achieve alone. Word of these results moves upward, not as rumor, as documentation. Staff officers flag the data. Comparisons are made between units with and without coverage. The disparity is too large to ignore. The effect is not marginal, it is structural. Plans begin forming beyond Okinawa. The U.D.S. Army had already anticipated a brutal next phase of the war. An invasion of mainland Japan would require infantry to hold ground against a determined defender. At night, under constant pressure, casualty estimates are staggering. Anything that reduces vulnerability after dark is not a luxury, it is necessity. Before Japan surrenders, projections are drawn up. Tens of thousands of night vision systems, distribution across infantry divisions, dedicated training pipelines in the Philippines and Okinawa. The M3 carbine is no longer viewed as an experiment. It is viewed as a foundation. But history intervenes. On August 15th, 1945, Japan announces its surrender. The planned invasion is canceled. The expansion of the program never happens. The urgency that drove rapid adoption evaporates overnight. Most of the systems already produced are dismantled, cut apart, destroyed, removed from circulation. The technology is too sensitive, too dangerous to leave intact in a post-war world that is already reorganizing itself. And so the moment passes quietly. There is no parade for the system, no chapter in popular histories, no widespread recognition of the men who operated it. The M3 fades from public memory almost as quickly as it appeared. But it does not disappear. The ideas survive. Engineers carry lessons forward. The concept of fighting at night, not by illumination, but by observation, reshapes development priorities. Successor systems appear in Korea. More refined optics emerge in Vietnam. Passive night vision replaces active infrared. Each generation improves range, reliability, and portability. But the lineage is clear. Modern night vision traces back to a crude, heavy system powered by a battery pack and operated by infantrymen who learned, under fire, how to manage its limits. What happened on Okinawa was not a technological revolution announced to the world. It was a quiet proof, a demonstration that darkness is not a permanent advantage, only an unchallenged one. And once challenged, it never truly recovers. After Okinawa, Robert Chun does not become a symbol. There are no interviews, no medals pinned in front of cameras, no after-action citations that elevate his name above the rest. In the official record, he appears briefly, then fades. Chun remains what he was during the fighting, a private first class assigned to an experimental program. His name surfaces in technical summaries and unit documentation, attached not to heroism, but to performance. He is referenced the way equipment is referenced, by function, not by story. That absence is not accidental. The M3 program was classified. Operators were forbidden from discussing the system, even with fellow soldiers. The weapon's effectiveness depended on secrecy, and secrecy followed it home. When the war ends, most M3 carbines are destroyed, cut apart with torches, the optics dismantled, the battery systems separated and scrapped. The technology is erased deliberately to prevent it from being studied, copied, or misunderstood in a world already shifting toward new rivalries. With the system gone, the operators vanish with it. There is no centralized effort to preserve their stories. No formal declassification that invites memoirs or recollections. The men who carried the system return to ordinary units, or leave the army entirely. Chun's trail ends the same way. His background before the war is unclear. His life after Okinawa is undocumented. Whether he survived the remainder of the conflict, where he lived, what he did, none of it appears in accessible records. What remains is a name tied to a capability. This is the quiet cost of classified success. The operators were never meant to be known. Their value lay in what they prevented: attacks that never happened, casualties that never occurred, decisions the enemy chose not to make. There is no monument for that kind of impact. Chun did not storm a hill in daylight. He did not lead a charge. He spent nights managing voltage, heat, and condensation. He watched silhouettes crawl toward lines they would never reach. He fired when timing and geometry aligned, and powered down when discipline demanded restraint. The work was technical, methodical, unglamorous. It required patience more than aggression, control more than courage. And when it worked, nothing dramatic happened because nothing happened at all. That is why history struggles to remember it. Wars are often told through moments of visible action, breakthroughs, assaults, decisive clashes. But what happened on Okinawa at night does not fit that mold. It was a subtraction. Fewer attacks, fewer casualties, less chaos. The absence of violence became the result. Chun and the other operators changed the shape of the fight by removing something the enemy depended on. Darkness stopped being protection. Surprise stopped being reliable. Confidence eroded into caution. Those effects do not leave photographs. They leave numbers. And even those numbers, over time, blur into larger narratives about the campaign as a whole. The men behind them remain unmarked. That is the final irony of the M3 program. Its impact reaches forward through decades of military development, influencing how armies fight at night to this day. Yet the individuals who proved it under combat conditions are remembered, if at all, only in fragments, a name in a report, a footnote in a study, a shadow behind a system. Robert Chun did what the system required. Then history moved on. What happened on Okinawa did not look like a revolution. There was no announcement declaring the night defeated, no moment where commanders gathered to acknowledge a turning point, no single engagement that could be pointed to as decisive. Instead, the change revealed itself through absence. Attacks that no longer came, routes that were no longer used, hours of darkness that passed without contact. This is how doctrine actually dies. Not when it is disproven in theory, but when it stops working in practice. For years, Japanese night infiltration had been effective because it rested on a simple assumption that darkness created safety. That assumption shaped training, planning, and execution across multiple campaigns. It was trusted because it had earned trust. On Okinawa, that trust was quietly broken, not by overwhelming force, not by superior numbers, but by a capability the enemy could not see, could not hear, and could not understand in time to counter. The M3 system did not win battles by itself. It did something far more important. It removed certainty. Once Japanese units could no longer assume concealment after dark, every movement became a gamble. Every approach had to be questioned. Every plan required conditions that might not exist when needed. And when a tactic depends on perfect conditions, it stops being reliable. That is the real shift. Darkness didn't disappear. It simply stopped guaranteeing anything. For the American infantry, the impact was measured in what didn't happen. Fewer grenades thrown into foxholes, fewer emergency reactions in the middle of the night, fewer men pulled from the line at dawn because exhaustion had finally broken them. Those outcomes don't make headlines, but they change wars. The irony is that this transformation came from something imperfect, heavy, fragile, limited by batteries, heat, and weather. The system demanded restraint and discipline rather than aggression. Used carelessly, it failed. Used correctly, it reshaped the battlefield. And then it vanished. The war ended. The invasion never came. The system was dismantled. The operators returned to anonymity. The technology was absorbed into future designs, stripped of its origins. What remained was an idea. That night is not a permanent advantage. That invisibility is conditional. That systems, not just courage, decide when doctrines collapse. Modern armies take this for granted. Night vision is assumed. Darkness is planned for, not relied upon. The battlefield no longer resets when the sun goes down. That shift traces back to moments like Okinawa, to a handful of nights when something experimental worked just well enough to force the enemy to rethink everything. Robert Chun never knew how far that change would reach. He didn't see its legacy. He didn't live to watch generations of soldiers move confidently through the dark, using tools refined from the one he carried. He did his job. He followed the system's rules. He survived the night. And then history moved on. The men who operated the M3 carbine did not win glory. They won something quieter. Time, sleep, space, lives that were never counted because the attacks that would have taken them never happened. That is the nature of invisible victories. They leave no monuments. They leave no stories unless someone goes back and looks for them. On Okinawa, the night did not end in fire or noise. It ended in silence. And once silence replaced confidence, darkness was never the same again.